Hello everyone, today I will be sharing a ton of unreleased information about the Saints Row series. After I saw the Saints Row presentation with Greg Donovan, I decided to follow up with him and see if I can get more information about those different videos that he showed off. And after a long back and forth over the past 3 months, we finally have some more detailed information about what was going on during those trailers. I first want to start off by saying a huge thanks to Greg Donovan. His patience over the last 3 months has been astounding. He's a very generous person. He's very thoughtful. And thanks to him and the others over at Volition, we were finally able to get a little more detail about this unreleased content. I also wanted to thank Scott Phillips, who's the design director on Saints Row 2 and the third, Brian Dillo, who is a seasoned Saints Row lead and mission designer, and Mike Watson, who's the Volition community manager. Greg told me he was unable to get all the specifics on my questions, so he was able to pull these guys in to help out. So my first question was, as much as you're allowed to discuss, I would like to know a lot more about the Saints Row vision piece. Was this a Saints Row 1 build to prototype concepts for Saints Row 2, an early build of Saints Row 2, or both? This was his answer. If memory serves, this vision piece was created by Saints Row 2's design director, Scott Phillips, and cinematics lead, Ev Gilioso. It was intended to communicate the overall vision and tone of Saints Row 2. We wanted to show where we were planning to innovate over Saints Row 1 in regards to both features and tone. I believe most of the assets in that piece were from Saints Row 2 and not Saints Row 1. We were probably in early pre-production when this was made. In addition to being a useful tool for the team, it also helped sell the vision to THQ. Fun fact, the Saints Row 2 team started working on Saints Row 2 well before Saints Row 1 had even submitted to first party. In retrospect, you could say this approach was either very confident or very risky. At least I don't think too many publishers or developers start significant pre-production work on a sequel to a new franchise until ensuring the first one meets its number projections. Thankfully, it turned out to be the right choice. Anyway, there was a distinct rivalry between the two teams. Saints Row 2 had a completely separate set of directors, and of course, they wanted to put their own mark on the game and implement changes to features and tone that hadn't yet even finished on the first game. And the Saints Row 1 directors, confident in their vision, wanted the Saints Row 2 team to stay closer to the Saints Row 1 vision. So despite the game looking a lot like Saints Row 1, this was indeed a Saints Row 2 build, so clearly there was a design decision during production to change how the game looked away from how Saints Row 1 looked and to create a new art style. Question number 2. Can you talk about the initial city changes you wanted to make that didn't make it into the final release of Saints Row 2? There were many structures in the concept that never made it into release. Have you heard the old adage, writing is rewriting? Well, software development's analog could be things will change, and in many cases, these changes are really scope reductions. The Saints Row 2 team was really green in regards to having open world development experience. Remember, Saints Row 1 was Volition's first open world game, and it was still in development, and even lead/director experience. It was baptism by fire, and so of course our initial scope and vision was way more than was possible. Even the most experienced teams fall into this trap in early pre-production. Getting to the point, of course, the Saints Row 2 world started off with areas that never made it into the final game. I've attached some early concepts from Saints Row 2 that never saw any development beyond 2D concepts. We had planned a whole Amusement Park District, which was really cool on paper, but once you start scoping out the work, example, a working roller coaster is not cheap, you quickly see the team needs to scale back and make some hard decisions before getting into production. We knew we wanted to expand the world compared to Saints Row 1, but we weren't sure the best way to go about it because we didn't know, at the time, how long it would take for us to create the world, and importantly, whether or not we had enough time to populate the world with gameplay. No one wants to explore a huge open world with nothing to do in it, so we ended up targeting some additional districts above ground, like the Trailer Park District, and added in a number of underground areas, which were, I think, quicker to create because they were smaller and didn't need as much assets as full-blown new districts. Incidentally, these underground areas were originally designed to incentivize players to explore the world, but our heat mapping and telemetry tools showed they were not nearly as popular as the above-ground areas. So the first concept he attached is a restaurant called Martian Mike's. I would assume this would be a unique restaurant specific to the Amusement Park District. It's such a shame that this wasn't in the final game, because I would have loved to have seen all the different scenarios that could happen in this amusement park. Now, the second picture attached is a more full view of the amusement park. As you can tell, this looks like this could have been in the Marina District. The way this looks actually reminds me of, especially the far left side of the pier there, reminds me a lot of that far northeast corner of the map where there's a large dock, and I think there is a boat store there. And yeah, as you can see, this looks like this could have been a really amazing dynamic area. Now, this third concept is a radically different interpretation of the theme park. This looks like it's more horror-based. As you can see, it would have been called Zombie Cove, Isle of Death. And yeah, it's got a lot more horror elements to it. It's got blood everywhere, fountain of blood, glowing lava, shroud Ferris wheel. This would have been awesome to see in the game. It would have been a really stark contrast to the rest of the city. Now, this last concept is more of an overhead. I think it looks like the same horror-based island that we had before. As you can see, there's the skull and the volcano, eye fountain of blood, shark bay. So clearly they had some very ambitious goals, and it's such a shame that none of this was available in Saints Row 2. Hopefully, maybe in the future, Saints Row 5, we can get some sort of an amusement park like this. So fingers crossed. Question number 3. I noticed you had some activity ideas that never seen the light of day. Could you talk a bit about these? Happy Fun Ball looked quite the interesting concept, and considering wrecking balls are nowhere to be seen in Saints Row 2. Happy Fun Ball seemed like a winner on paper, but it had 2 major problems. 1. The concept called for driving a giant crane with a wrecking ball on the end of it, but in gameplay, it was dreadfully not fun, and the tech to which we were limited at the time didn't leave much hope for further iteration to make it fun. 2. The elevated player position in the crane made all the targets tiny and hard to see, which, with the limited mobility of the crane, worked together to doom the idea. But Happy Fun Ball did return in spirit, as the original concept for the bank vault in Saints Row 3 was a wrecking ball that later changed to be the vault itself. This concept/prototype is a case study on great game development, in my opinion. We had a concept that seemed great on paper, allowed the team to learn and prototype it, and were professional enough to not fall in love with the idea to kill it because it wasn't fun. And, as an added bonus, the lead designer on Happy Fun Ball, Brian Dillo, remembered the core idea on Saints Row III and based, for my money, one of the best missions in the entire Saints Row series on it, the opening bank vault mission from Saints Row III. We also had a combine mechanic or activity prototyped and a wheelchair activity. Neither made it into the final game. Neither, as early prototypes, fit the tone we were going for on Saints Row 2. The combine activity was too brutal even for Saints Row 2, where the main character is something of a sadistic asshole. And the wheelchair mechanic just didn't make any sense. What was the point? It was ultimately in bad taste, and I think we changed the means of transportation to an ATV. We also toyed around with an interrogation mechanic. Many of the Saints Row 2 directors had worked on Punisher, a game that contained that mechanic, but that didn't make it either. I don't recall why. He also said, "It's occurring to me now that Saints Row 2 was quite disciplined when it came to killing things that weren't in line with the vision, or good enough. Yay for us." Question number 4. The Ronin and the Brotherhood both made it into the full game, but the leaders of Progression weren't, in favor of the Sons of Samdi. Could you provide any details on the original gang concepts, their stereotypes/gimmicks, and storyline? It looks like there was quite the radical change in design. The leaders of Progression were a fusion of punk and militant anarchists. Again, going from memory, I think their motivation was to cause very harmful mischief. Read, lots of explosions and destruction, the ultimate in punk, throughout the city. I suspect we cut them because collectively the directors decided they weren't as strong as the other gangs/factions. And more importantly, we only had the means to develop 3 gangs. We started out with at least 5 gang concepts, perhaps more. In addition to the leaders of Progression, we also had a biker gang who morphed from standard Harley-Davidson riders to an English mod gang on scooters. Question number 5. There are a few minor features that appear to be cut. Could you elaborate on the disaster areas, break your enemies, and gang customization segments? Was being able to change the Saints' color a cut idea? Disaster areas were concepts to show how we intended to have the city change or evolve over the course of playing. The Sunnyvale district had a zone change after completing the Samdi mission, burning down the house, where you destroy the meth labs. After the mission, the neighborhoods had smoke/fire pouring out of the buildings. Under the hood, the Saints Row 2 city was made up of zones, and after key moments like this, we would swap out the before zone with the after zone. Break Your Enemies was a version of the interrogation found in the Punisher game Volition developed. The interrogation mechanic on Punisher was in part designed by Scott Phillips, a design director on Saints Row 2. As mentioned above, the mechanic didn't make it into the final game. As for gang customization, the mechanic as illustrated in the Vision video was simply far more robust than what made it into the game, choosing NPC types to be gang members. This is just again another great example of how much games can change between pre-production and production. As for the Saints color, I presume we made the choice to not allow players to change their color after recognizing that perhaps purple could and should be an integral part of the Saints Row brand and IP. Question 6. Moving on to Saints Row 3, or at least the original ideas, do you have any early story concepts that you really wanted to do? Do I have a story for you? After Saints Row the Third, myself, Steve Jaros, and Scott Phillips worked on an early narrative idea for Saints Row 3. It wasn't Saints Row the Third yet. Our preferred and recommended narrative was a concept tentatively called Subterfuge. The basic premise was that the Saints were going undercover and joining the Stillwater Police Department. It was effectively a slow-paced stealth game. When we presented it to our bosses, the feedback was pretty much, is this a joke? A stealth game? Saints Row is about action and swagger. Figure out how to evolve and improve the tone we've capitalized on and work on that. And on top of it, we used an extremely pedantic and uncommon word as a work-in-progress title. They were absolutely correct. That failed pitch was a moment I'll never forget. I learned so much from it. 1, we failed to identify or analyze what the IP was and what made it resonate with our players, and instead pitched a concept that we personally wanted to do. And 2, our bosses didn't dictate a solution for us. Instead, they clearly communicated why and how we had strayed and then allowed us to fix it. That was extremely gracious of them, and I've never forgotten it. Question number 7. There was an original map design that looks a lot more asymmetrical and a lot larger than the steel port we know today. Can you discuss what prompted the change to something more symmetrical and seemingly smaller? Also, maybe some of the original districts and significant landmarks. I'm also curious if you have a higher resolution screenshot of the map, as I don't think there is currently one out there. Also, if possible, is there any unreleased material or screenshots of the original map in-game, or what it was currently finished or being prototyped? One of the mails back from a contributor in regards to this question was, verbatim, "City scope reduced due to the fact that Greg hates our players having fun. Also budget and scope concerns." The former is not correct, the latter is, for sure. Effectively, the city reduction is just another prime example of how scope changes in development after you better see how long the work will take. I've attached some files of the Saints Row the Third city maps I could dig up. One of them clearly shows how we cut by starting at the perimeter and making the islands smaller. And one of them is a very early map with gangs whose names I only vaguely remember. So here's a picture of a never before seen concept of what the Saints Row 3 map would have looked like. It looks like there are rough ideas of where each mission will take place, where major landmarks are, stores, and of course, which territories the gangs would have control over. And it's also very interesting to see that there was a fourth gang plan. The, don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the Oran dominates the east side. And this kind of makes sense, because in the final game, it was always kind of weird that the Morning Star owned both the middle section and the far right section of the map. So in this final picture is pretty interesting. You can tell where they had to cut corners, quite literally. You can see the faded outlines on the perimeter of the whole map of areas that have just been chopped off. But it's still really cool to see the difference between their original design concept and what came of Steelport. I think their original idea would have been really cool to see. I know a lot of people aren't fans of Steelport, but I think if they had the time and stuck with their original idea, it would have been a much better city than Steelport. And finally, this is the last question, question number 8. I said, finally, curious what Empire mode was in the cell phone menu. And he said, Empire mode was simply an original city takeover concept. It may have also included a variation of multiplayer that had city takeover in it. Some of the contributors have a vague recollection of an idea/game mode where players could go into other players' worlds and fight for control of areas. Or, as they said, that memory may just be a fever dream from that period of time. Basically, we think it was just a different name and visual style of what we ended up shipping. You know, truth be told, I think that idea of players going into other players' worlds and fighting for territory, I think that's personally an amazing idea. I think that's a goldmine right there. It's kind of like how in Dark Souls, you know, players can invade another player's world and you have to fight them, but on a larger scale. I think one of the most underused modes in Saints Row 1 and 2 were the takebacks, and I think this reminds me of that, where a rival gang is trying to take back a territory, and you have to eliminate the lieutenants to basically stop it. But there was really no consequence if you didn't really bother to do it. It would just keep flashing, and the only downside is you wouldn't be making money from that territory. But yeah, again, who knows? Maybe this Wild Fever Dream, again, makes it into Saints Row 5. I would love a concept like this. It's kind of like multiplayer, where you have to fight for control over different territories. That sounds like a cool idea. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. You saw all the different concepts and pictures that I posted throughout the video. I'll have those in a zip file in Google Drive, so you can go down in the description and download those. I'm not doing anything like putting a watermark on them or anything like that. I think that's despicable. This is concepts that, Greg and the people at Volition were very generous enough to send. So I believe they should be in the hands of everyone, untampered with. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, thanks so much to Greg Donovan, Scott Phillips, Brian Dillo, and Mike Watson for helping with this. It's been a long 3 months waiting for it, but I think it was definitely worth it. I think unreleased content, even if it's just written or photos or whatever, I think it's the coolest thing in the world, and I love being able to even share just a little bit of that with you guys. Again, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.